Hello, my name is Maria Keiko Yasuoka. I'm a woman. I'm a Japanese, and I have a almost white skin and brown hair. I'm talking at home in Sapporo City, Japan. I'm a visiting researcher at Otaru University of Commerce, Otaru City, Hokkaido, Japan. Today's talk title is COVID-19 and Organ Transplant Medicine, the importance of a medical anthropological praxis. Please look at my avatar picture. Thank you. First of all, as an introduction, COVID-19 pandemic from 2020 to present. I'd like to focus on organ transplantation and the pandemic because Japan has faced a pandemic for the first time in 100 years since the Spanish flu. No one has experienced a pandemic. Also, this is the first pandemic in organ transplant era in Japan, and the first organ transplant from a blinded donor was performed in 1968 to today. In fact, organ transplantation and donation was stopped because the ICU intensive care unit ICUs was filled with COVID-19 patient. Next slide. Average number of patients per medical institution nationwide. This bar chart shows the number of COVID-19 infections nationwide. In 5.28 persons per week from September 9th to 15th, 2024. Actually, we're in a post-COVID-19, so this 1 year, the infectious patient number is up and down, repeating. First pandemic in Japan, 2020 to present. WHO declared it a pandemic on March 11th, 2020, still ongoing. It has subsided, but it is not over yet because there have been no declaration of its end. The first declaration of a public health emergency of international concern by WHO was issued on January 30th, 2020 and lifted on May 5th, 2023. COVID-19's infectious disease clarification by Japan's Ministry of Health, Labor and Welfare was downgraded from Category 2 to Category 5. Category 2 issued February 1st, 2020 and moved to Category 5 May 8th, 2023 to today. Impact of the pandemic on organ transplant. Immunosuppressants are needed to prevent organ rejection for a transplant patient, organ recipients, immunocompromised and high risk of infectious diseases. No vaccine or treatment was available at first in this COVID-19 pandemic. Japan has a serious chronic organ shortage due to too few organ donations from blinded status. As a result, Japan is dependent on living donors and overseas transplant. During the pandemic, overseas travel was restricted or prohibited all over the world, and overseas transplants were suspended. ICUs full of COVID-19 patients. Both organ transplant, organ recipients, and organ donors, has been halted for the following reasons. 1. ICU beds are essential for patients undergoing organ transplant surgery. 2. For living donor transplant, ICU beds are needed for both the organ donor and the organ recipient. In Japan, most kidney transplants relied on living donors due to too few organ donations from brain-dead donors, so more ICU beds are needed for transplant surgery. During the COVID-19 era, when the pandemic began, organ transplant treatment was initially halted in Japan due to infection control measures and medical institutions being overwhelmed with COVID-19 patients. Designated transplant hospitals were forced to temporarily halt organ transplant. Recipients will take immunosuppressant every day after transplantation, weakening their immune systems, making infections a contraindication for transplant of patients. Organ transplant surgery cancelled. Japan's first pandemic is an opportunity to re-examine what is taken for atarimae in Japanese. It means that natural or unsurprising or routine work in English. We understood that infectious diseases were a contraindication to transplant medicine. But it was only after the pandemic that we realized how vulnerable organ transplants are to infectious diseases. Organ shortage is a big issue in Japan, but the pandemic led to restriction on overseas travel and a sharp increase in infectious diseases patients. And Japan's transplant medicine, which had relied on overseas transplant and living donor transplant effectively, came to a halt. Designated transplant hospitals. In Japan, organ donation facilities and organ transplant facilities are operated separately, with 331 facilities capable of handling organ donations. Of these, 267 facilities are capable of handling transplant for children under the age of 18. Transplant facilities vary by organ, with 12 facilities for hearts, 23 for livers, and 123 facilities for kidneys nationwide. During the COVID-19 pandemic, there have been shortage of ICU beds, hospital staffs, vaccines, medicine, healthcare, information on infection control, and social understanding, etc. So everything's shortage at that time. The post-COVID-19 era. On May 8, 2023, COVID-19 classification was downgraded in Japan. COVID-19 was downgraded from Category 2 to Category 5. Category 2 is designated infectious disease equivalent to tuberculosis. Category 5 is infectious diseases class equivalent to influenza. Financial support for vaccinations and medical treatment, which is provided in Category 2, was cancelled. Due to immunosuppression, organ recipients require multiple vaccinations. However, financial support is not available for Category 5. It's a big problem for patients, especially organ recipients. Following the downgrade of COVID-19. Following the downgrade, the post-COVID-19 era has begun in Japan. The government has lifted the infection control requirement for transplant facilities. Since the pandemic, the number of organ donations has increased, but there is facing an unexpected situation of a shortage of transplant facilities. In 2023, more than 500 patients were unable to receive transplants of 6 kind organs, including heart and lungs, because medical institutions were unable to prepare the necessary systems to handle organ donations from blinded patients, resulting in the waste of valuable organs. Changes in the post-COVID-19 era. Most people, a gradual transition to normal daily life has begun. For example, domestic or international travel, etc. Freedom from wearing masks, changing from mandatory to choice. COVID-19 vaccines are left to personal decision-making. However, the recipient daily life is the same as it was during the pandemic. Masks, vaccines, and infection prevention are necessary forever. This pandemic has made us re-recognize the toughness of organ recipients' life. Organ donations rising after COVID-19. Although organ donations are increasing, there is a shortage of transplant facilities in Japan. Since the revision of the transplant law in 2010, organ donation has become possible with the only consent of the family consent, and organ donation have begun to increase. In 2023, there were 132 organ donations from blinded donors, the highest number ever. Although the number temporarily decreased due to the impact of COVID-19, organ donations are now increasing again. But the shortage of transplant facilities is becoming more and more serious now. Number of blended organ donations. First of all, red part. Japan's organ transplant law is said to be the strictest in the world, with only 7 cases in 2009. And orange part. The organ transplant law was revised in 2010 to allow organ donation with the consent of the family, and the number of organ donation increased 6-fold to 44 cases in 2011. And the green part. The organ transplant law was revised and the organ donations increased 10-fold 10 years after to 98 cases in 2019. And the yellow part. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, organ transplant are suspended and organ donation fall to 67 cases in 2021. Finally, blue part. In the post-COVID-19 era, the number of organ donations rose again to 132 cases ever in 2023. Conclusions. COVID-19 is ongoing and has not been eradicated medically, but socially we are living in a post-COVID-19 era. Due to immunosuppressant, recipients need stricter infection prevention measures in the post-COVID-19 era. Although there was a temporary decrease during COVID-19, the number of brain-dead organ donations has increased. Since May 2023, the government has handled all responsibility for transplant care, including financial and human resource support throughout the process, to medical institutions. As a future programs, although organ donation numbers are up, we face the challenge of having too few transplant facilities to carry out organ transplant surgery. This is Japanese organ transplant site situation in a post-COVID-19 era in 2024 in Japan now. Thank you.